Haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason Heal. I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim Institute, and this is our weekly short-form podcast. These podcasts are released in tandem with our weekly column and are a chance for you to hear in-depth from the column's author about some of the thinking that went into producing their final piece. Today, we talk to Maxim senior researcher Marcus Roberts about his recent column. Marcus, welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Jason.
We're talking about your latest column for Maxim, Hard Lessons from COVID. I feel like there was a lot of hard lessons we learned during COVID, but now it's kind of 2.5, 3 years later. We're still learning some lessons. You point out in the column, we've got economic lessons, we've got health lessons, as opposed to also the health lessons that we apparently learned during the pandemic. What are some other areas, and what ways are we learning these hard lessons?
Well, I think you're right that the lessons are there for us to learn if we want to. But
that's a good distinction.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that we are learning lessons. So this column was inspired by the research that we've just released on the primary school education sector. And what happened during COVID and what lessons we could potentially learn. And one of the reasons we wanted to write this was because there are a lot of lessons out there, but I'm not convinced that anyone really wants to learn them.
Yeah.
I think there's a real view that actually COVID, as you say, 2.5 years ago.
Let's just put it behind us, maybe?
I think so.
Yeah.
A bit of fatigue.
Yeah.
Understandably, amongst the public.
Yeah.
Don't want to talk about it.
Given we kind of over talked about it for 12 months. Absolutely. And multiple lockdowns and looking at vaccination numbers and infection numbers and daily case numbers.
It was traffic lights.
Traffic lights, and then it was something else, and you had the step down system, and then there were the 4 levels, and then So
it's all bringing back painful memories.
I'm having an episode now. Yeah,
exactly. So I can understand why the public doesn't want to revisit COVID and what happened. But I think would be entirely remiss of the government or someone in the policy space to not be looking at the effects of locking down large parts of the country for weeks, if not months on end, including putting all our children into online learning.
Yeah.
So taking them out of the classroom and putting them into online learning of varying benefits to the students depending on their situations.
Yeah. Okay. So we at Maxim then thought, well, we're in the policy space. We'll take on some of this responsibility to do a review, and we've done this review of the primary school sector. What are some of the effects that you're seeing then in education that are coming out of this paper?
Yeah, well, I think the main point to take away from the paper is that the primary school sector doesn't get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Didn't get a lot of attention in COVID from the Ministry of Education. All the focus was on the years 11 to 13, because that's where your national exams are happening and where students gain university entrance.
Yeah.
So that meant resources were directed to those year levels first.
Yeah.
Devices, internet connection, support.
I remember the government rollout of devices and trying to connect regions to the internet and stuff like that. Yeah. So that was all. These guys are going to get into university or trying to get into university at the end of the year. So we're going to.
Yeah, understandably, they had the immediate demand for that. But the trouble is there's been a learning loss at the lower levels, not just at these higher levels, but the primary sector. And the trouble is that if we don't make good that learning loss, then we've got this tail of students who for the next few years are going to be moving up through the school system and then trying to go to university and into jobs who have been affected by the lockdowns, who we should not ignore. And the trouble is that we'll forget about COVID, but the effects on the education system, at least, will be felt for many years if we don't try and start remedying it now.
Just thinking someone who was 7 when we locked down, in 10 years' time will be going for their university entrance, we'll have 6 months of learning loss that maybe is compounded over the last 10 years.
Sure.
And they could be a year, 2 years behind in their learning.
Well, that's right. If you don't catch up, then every year you're behind, you're less likely to catch up. It's, as you say, it's going to compound, if not make the students feel that they, to start to feel that they're always behind and to maybe give up a little bit of education. So that's why to try and put the resources in now to catch up this cohort of students.
Yeah. So what would that look like with resourcing to catch up?
Well, I think the obvious one would be resourcing for extra tutoring, teacher aid. But I think the main thing is just to recognize there's a problem and then figuring out how we best solve that problem.
Yeah.
But also the paper looks at, okay, hopefully we won't have to do this again.
Yeah.
We've never done it before in our history, lock down and close the schools to everyone. Now that we have done it, it's part of our policy toolbox, obviously. We would be extremely remiss of the Ministry of Education and schools not to figure out, okay, how did it work? What can we do better next time? And a couple of things they could do better is figure out and keep an up-to-date database of who has devices in their schools. Then the schools feed into the Ministry of Education, so the Ministry of Education knows which schools need devices and other support, what software each school is using, in what way. But also to try and make good this divide that was exacerbated in COVID, this digital divide between the haves and the have-nots, between those with well-resourced schools, well-skilled teachers, an excellent home life for learning, and multiple devices, and those who did not have those things. And quite frankly, if you didn't have those things, you weren't going to do a lot of learning.
Yeah, no. Well, that's all in the paper. That's out now on our website. And so if people are interested, they can find it there. But Marcus, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Jason.
Now let's hear from Marcus as he reads his column.
Lawson's aphorism, "To govern is to choose," reminds us that there is no such thing as a free lunch. When a government chooses a particular course of action, it necessarily has less money, time and resources to spend on other things. More starkly, choosing a particular course of action actively detracts from other worthy goals. In the aftermath of our government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we should refamiliarize ourselves with Lawson and the costs of governmental decision-making. First, the economic cost. As a proportion of GDP, core Crown borrowing has grown from 32 to 50% between 2019 and today. We are now spending as much on debt servicing as we do on the police, corrections, justice, and customs combined. Secondly, the health cost. As the Minister of Health noted recently, the current increased wait times at emergency departments emerged during the pandemic. Quote, "I think it's pretty clear since the pandemic there has been an increasing pressure on our emergency departments overall. There is an increase in acute demand following on from the pandemic, and that is putting pressure on our hospitals." But perhaps the most significant cost is to our children. We all remember the extensive post-COVID truancy as school-age children stayed away from school in large numbers, even after in-person learning resumed. Overseas evidence gives us a hint of what Kiwi children went through. A survey of English parents conducted by the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the UCL Institute of Education recently reported that just under half of parents said that their child's social and emotional skills had worsened during the first year of the pandemic. Scholastically, the number of school leavers with NCEA Level 2 or above has plummeted since the COVID lockdowns. Māori students are particularly hard hit. University completion rates have also fallen thanks to learning loss during the pandemic. The untold story, though, is in the primary school sector. That has received less attention from both the government and the national consciousness, according to Maxim Institute's new discussion paper released this week, Hard Lessons, How Schools Can Profit from the Pandemic. In fact, this part of the school system is the foundation for all later learning. If students are struggling here, it will be much harder to catch up later. In essence, it's what the future looks like. Our paper demonstrates that primary schools weren't ready for a sudden and significant shift to online learning. As a result, the primary school sector's response, albeit well-intentioned and often commendable, was unprepared. The digital divide between well-resourced schools and learners and their poorer counterparts was exacerbated. Teachers had to devote more time to trying to improve their students' well-being. On the positive side, there was much more engagement between schools and students' families, and between families and what students are learning. Overall, the paper's message is that our primary school sector needs to be better resourced, prepared, and skilled in order to undertake fully remote learning in the future. Will our government take this choice? After all, to govern is to choose.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā, goodbye for now.